To me, the Royal Rumble will always be the greatest gimmick match of all time. Just everything about it, the history, the intrigue, the fact that, for me personally as a fan, whether I'm watching WWE a lot or I'm not, or the product's good, great, bad, terrible, or whatever in between, it still has its intrigue every year for me personally. I have not missed a Rumble. Yeah, since my first one, which I'm going to get to in a second here. You know, it's great in the sense where it took the concept of the Battle Royal, which is hit or miss for me personally. It was a big thing in the territory days. There's like a cash prize on the line, or or to showcase somebody like Andre the Giant or whatever. It was a well-placed gimmick match at certain points in time, on certain shows in the history of wrestling. But what Pat Patterson did with the Royal Rumble, take that Battle Royal concept and changing it up a little bit. Making it, like a gauntlet, because again, it's similar to the gauntlet match in a lot of ways, which could come later, but still, it's similar to a gauntlet kind of deal where, the concept of just, you never know what's going to happen, the whole 30-man, every 2 minutes, every 1 minute, whatever, equally timed intervals, so they say. But, it's just everything about it that he put together, again, the higher stakes on the line, the fact that the pay-per-view has become the most successful in the history of WWE, it really shows that just a simple idea, something that's grown out of a simple idea, can become so huge. It sets the road to WrestleMania. It can tell ongoing stories. It can start new feuds. You can have little mini dream matches in the middle. Just again, it's great. The surprises, the surprise entries. It's just everything about it. Just you truly love. And that's what I love about the Royal Rumble so much. Is just all that stuff. And it's not easy to put together, I can tell. You know what I mean? I will get to this later on, but even here locally, I booked a Rumble match back about 4 years ago. And it was hard. And there were still some mistakes with it and that, and it was rough around the edges, but I was glad it came off the way it did, because the Rumble match has always been my favorite. And the fact that the first Rumble here held in my hometown of Hamilton, Ontario, really, that means a lot to me, being, loving wrestling history and all that stuff. But the first Rumble I watched, it was actually the first true pay-per-view I watched. I say that because, so we didn't get Viewer's Choice pay-per-view here in Ontario, or Hamilton, Ontario anyway, until the fall of 1991. I remember wondering what it was. Never heard of pay-per-view. I was 8 years old. And I found out later it was for movies, special events, stuff like that. And I was intrigued by the concept of it. Now, I remember the first wrestling pay-per-view that aired here in Hamilton was the 91 Survivor Series, Hulk Hogan and The Undertaker, The Greatest Challenge. And I watched that scramble. So I always call it the first pay-per-view I watched, because it was. First one I watched live, a little more like listened to. I remember just doing something, probably drawing or playing with toys or whatever, and listening to it, and being really devastated that Hulk Hogan lost the title to The Undertaker. And and so the Rumble I'd always heard about. Now, my wrestling fandom was really hitting its stride at this point in late '91. I had been watching wrestling pretty much since I was about 4 years old, so 1987. But my fandom didn't really truly get to where, where I'm just, it's like wrestling's gonna be a be all end all until I was about 8. And when the whole, the King Cobra biting, Jake Roberts' King Cobra biting the Macho Man. So I remember I watched the Survivor Series on Tuesday in Texas, scrambled, and listened to it. And there was a time you could get actually a decent picture here and there, but it wasn't often. But I remember the 92 Rumble, I remember almost asking my dad, is there a way we can get this? Now, back then to order a pay-per-view, what you needed was a decoder, which was this wooden, this wood finish box, electronic box, like a wooden type finish. That, that would just, they would decode, I guess, for pay TV, pay-per-views, whatever. And the converter box, which we call it, which the channel box, which, got the channels. There was a 2-in-1 where they both came together. We had that. I think it would cost a little bit extra. But we were with, I believe, I want to say Rogers at the time, Rogers Cable. And we had one, but it hadn't been hooked up in a little while. I think I just kind of decreased our cable deal or whatever. But I remember my dad got it hooked back up in time for the Rumble. And so he said, we're going to order it. And I was like really excited because I'd never seen a Rumble match before. And the Rumble at this point is still in its infancy. I know there was experimental Rumbles on house shows on that, but in terms of like, you know, actual Rumbles that aired on television, there had been 3 on pay-per-view, and of course the very first one that aired special on the USA Network, again, that one here in Hamilton. But I knew the concept, or at least most of it, and I remember even thinking at 8 years old, I'm 8 going on 9, I was going to be 9 that March, in January 1992, the star power in this thing is utterly insane. You look at it now even. You have, at the time, you know, it's legends past, present, and future. Or even or at a time, you know what I mean? The star power was incredible. You look at it now, it's a who's who of professional wrestling. I think the only, you know, the only thing is that you had the couple guys, again, I love this too. You guys like Steve Kurt and Barry Darsow, who, you know, were playing some not so great gimmicks at the time, but especially in the case of Barry Darsow, he was committed to the Repo Man. We say what we want to say about it, but those guys were a big deal. Were a big deal at the time. You know what I mean? But or just before that, you know, Steve Kern had a great success as one half of the Fabulous Ones. He was a big star in Florida. Again, Barry Darsow, Demolition Smash. You guys say more. And that's what I mean. It's a who's who of wrestling in that match. Even guys who we wouldn't call Hall of Famers per se were still, you know, a big deal at least one point in their careers. Yeah, that's a shot at Virgil. No, I'm kidding. Sort of. But that's what I mean. I remember watching that, and I remember just wanting Flair. You know, my young fan was, get somebody eliminate him already. Like, come on. We're all confident Hogan was going to do it, and then that finish, that memorable finish, never forget it. And Flair put on a performance of a lifetime in that matchup, and one of the greatest performances of his career. And you look at his career and the performances he's had, there's a list miles long. And I understand when people do this in matches, like, you know, go a long time because conditioning and all that, stamina, and you can get blown up at being in the ring a long time. But Flair pretty much worked almost everyone, at least the bulk of the wrestlers that came to that curtain that night. At least for like even a few seconds, you know what I mean? And he has some great mini matches. You know, you get like little dream matches like him and, you know, Bulldog, or him and you know, or you get, you know, or him and Michaels squaring off. You know what I mean? Like Michaels was just the barbershop angle just aired a week before the Rumble. Michaels just beginning his singles push literally that week. Again, you know, Flair renewing rivalries with, you know, guys from his territory days, like, you know, Kerry Von Erich and Greg Valentine. You know, he was feuding with Piper at the time on WWF TV, but same time though, they had an old feud too. And you think if JR was there, joining Grohl and Bobby, let's just say, he would have been spinning wrestling history, but at the time he didn't really reference other companies. So I understood that, but like, what I love though too is, again, like I said, the mini dream matches you get with Flair and Boss Man. You know, it was so random at times, but it was so great. And I also love the fact too that the whole spot with Piper, where, you know, in the middle of the Rumble, the ring's cleared and it's only Flair, and Piper comes out and just Flair's reaction like, oh no, why him? Like, kind of deal. It was great, and the crowd's reaction was fantastic. And that really, you know, that set the tone for WrestleMania that year. And it was a rough time for wrestling. That's when the scandal, sadly, and all that broke out. But still, I remember I watched that with, I remember it was my father, my two uncles were there. Now, my Uncle Roy liked wrestling. My Uncle Bill was not a big wrestling fan, but he obviously just coming to, you know, hang out with his brothers, right? But, yeah, like I mean, so a lot of us were there. My dad's best friend at the time, Kerry, he was there with us too, watching the show. And, yeah, we're all laughing at Bobby Heenan's commentary. And even just the little jabs Gorilla would take in that match. You know, he doesn't like Flair or whatever, like, or even just the one little bit where Hercules, he wasn't in the match for very long. It was actually one of his last appearances. I remember he had that memorable one at the Garden shortly after. Hercules runs out, and he does a little thing with Flair. And Heenan, like, you know, Heenan's like losing it, and Gorilla smugly, maybe he remembers how you treated him. But that was good continuity there too. Or when I think his girl said Barbarian doesn't like Flair. Heenan's like, I was his manager, he barely liked me. That was good stuff. So like stuff like that, and again, you had those guys working with Flair, getting Flair and Haku, stuff you wouldn't see normally. Flair and Jake Roberts, you never saw that. And just again, you know, it was, everything about that match just was amazing. And Flair's performance, you had to give it to him. And he was 43, like 42, 43 years old at the time, and he's still clearly in amazing ring shape. You know what I mean? He lasted the whole match, and he picked his spots perfectly. That's what I mean. That was the beauty of Flair. He picked his spots perfectly. But I remember after watching that first Rumble match, this is what I'm getting to, I was hooked. So later that year, I remember, that was when Almost Weekly, we're going to Jumbo Video. Now, my parents would usually let me rent, we sometimes rent 4 or 5 movies at a time. My parents would let me pick 2. I'd pick one wrestling and just one regular movie. I remember I rented the 91 Rumble. I believe I actually rented it, I remember, just before SummerSlam that year at Wembley Stadium. And I had a VCR in my room too, at the time, a VCR and a television. And the reason I referenced the 91 Rumble, which was good in itself, I really liked the 91 Rumble. There's been very rarely a bad Rumble. There's been some lackluster ones, obviously, but very rarely a bad one. It's like, the Royal Rumble's like pizza. Even when it's mediocre, it's still good. You'll still eat it. But, yeah. But anyway, so I remember years later, we're talking maybe almost 25 some years later, I meet Shane Douglas at an indie show here in Hamilton, and I know a lot of people asking questions about ECW, whatever, issues with Flair, yada yada yada. I wanted to ask him about the 91 Rumble, because he was in that. He lasted quite a while. And he was like kind of a newcomer to WWF anyway at the time. And he left shortly after, I believe, because that was, I believe his father passed away or whatever. So, or got sick or one of the two, I can't remember. But either way, so I'm sorry, I digress. But I asked him about that. And he says to me, he's like, oh God, he's like, the arena that night was so hot. He said, like, because it was in Miami. And he's like, oh, the arena was so hot. He's like, you know, he's like, I was exhausted getting backstage. Like, I was just, he's like, I almost couldn't breathe. And then I knew as soon as he said that, I'm thinking in my head Rick Martel, who was in that match for around 50 minutes or so. And he said to me too that he thought Rick Martel was going to need an oxygen tank after the whole thing was over. He said it looked that way. And Martel, here's a guy who's in great shape. You know, and his performance, it definitely does not get the recognition it deserves that he did in the Rumble that night. He was incredible. He was still going. Like, he would obviously, you had to take your rests. But like, especially if the arena's as hot as Douglas said it was. But yet he was still go. He wasn't always just on the ropes all the time. Like, he was doing his thing. He was getting heavily involved in the match. And to me, that really shows how committed he was to, you know, obviously because he knew that night was going to put him over strong in a way because he's the Iron Man that year. And that's the thing I loved about the Rumble, too. You could get put over in so many different ways. The Diesel spot, as they call it now, which they call the big man spot, where you clear everyone out, or they come through the curtain one by one, or whatever. Boom, boom, boom. You can put a big man over that way. You can just put somebody over by being in the Final Four. We got the Iron Man every year. It works. You can put so much talent over in these type of that type of match. And again, like I said, it sets the tone for WrestleMania. It can set so many things up for WrestleMania. And the Rumble's been doing that even before the title shot at WrestleMania was on the line, which didn't happen until 93. Then I know kind of like when Hogan won the Rumble like 91, he's kind of like the de facto, he's going to get the shot at Sergeant Slaughter type deal, which pretty much they used the Rumble to pretty much insinuate that. And again, the 92 Rumble was the first one with the major stakes on the line, with the title being on the line, and one of only 2 Rumbles where that happened. And yeah, like, again, like I said, I was hooked. I remember my cousins and I, we like, because we'd have our own wrestling shows in my old basement on Clyde Street here in Hamilton at the time. We'd have our own Rumbles, and we would have like the weirdest, like, even before they were actually doing mystery guests, if you will. we were doing our own. Like, we'd have guys from WCW coming in. Here's Surfer Sting in the Rumble. Here's PN News in the Rumble. Stuff like that. We would do that, though. We would actually do that. And it was so much fun. Cactus Jack, long before Foley was in WWF, we'd have him in our Rumble. Because we were getting into WCW at the time. Now, I'll say this too about the 92 Rumble, back to it. I knew who Flair was. I knew he was a big deal in WCW, because I'd read magazines and that in the past. But I never really fully knew the extent of how good he really was, or how big of a star he really was. I knew he was a significant deal, just I didn't know how big. But anyway, so back to what I was saying. I remember the 94 Rumble, oh my God. Such good storytelling, and that 94 Rumble, in my opinion, does not get the praise it deserves. I love the 94 Rumble for the sheer fact that Bret Hart was one of the co-winners. No, but the story they told with Bret that night was remarkable, which is weird. They told one of the weirdest and most unbelievably wackiest stories in WWF history with The Undertaker in the Yokozuna casket match. I'm not going to talk about that. But anyway, you know what I mean? And then they tell one of the best stories they ever did with Bret and Owen that night. The split finally truly happens. Owen kicks Bret's leg out from under his leg that same night. And I remember too thinking, okay, well, obviously Bret's not going to be in the Rumble, and they teased it so well. Now, the other good story they had was Lex Luger. Actually, they built Luger well going into that Rumble, because he wasn't supposed to get another title shot with Yoko being champion. But of course, there was that thing, well, Yoko might not be champion after the Rumble. So, in order to skip that, in order to go through that clause of the contract, Mr. Fuji, Yoko's manager at the time, co-manager with Jim Cornette, had two hired guns come in from Japan, Great Kabuki and Tenryu. I thought that was good stuff too. I thought it was good. So I think they should have given them more hype, personally, to make it known that they're a big deal, especially in Tenryu's case at the time. But they never did. But it still was a good story. It didn't make sense. It was a very logical story. And I remember during the match too, that was the match that put Kevin Nash over. That set the tone for him being a main event guy. It showed he had the star power to actually be a main event guy. He was Shawn's bodyguard. Shawn was his bodyguard at the time. And they hyped it so well that there might be tension between the two of them in that Rumble, because they did a little promo on WWF TV that weekend where Shawn was like, and then it's going to come down to me and Big Daddy Cool here, and he's going to step over the top rope and give me the win. And Diesel's like, wait, I'm not going to do that. And then they started a little argument. I thought that was good. That built intrigue, because I'm thinking when Nash was out there doing his spot, which again now we call the Diesel spot, eliminating everyone, and it put him over like huge. Like I said, it set the tone for him that whole year. He was just went from being Shawn's bodyguard and won the odd squash match here on television to saying, "Oh, this guy could be a star." And it was so well done. Again, that Rumble told such a good story with that too. And we were all wondering who's going to break it up. We were thinking Shawn. Now again, I'm watching this Rumble match again. It was at Clyde Street in Hamilton, though we were on the upstairs level this time, and it was a duplex. Again, it was myself, my father, Carrie, my uncles, cousins. A lot of cousins were there that night. And we're thinking it's going to be Shawn. That Shawn's going to walk through the curtain being like, oh God, what do I do? But we're thinking who's going to break it up. We knew somebody had to, and then I think when somebody said it's going to be another big man, or it's going to be just like a big name or whatever, or it's going to be Luger. And it was great when Macho Man came out and got a number. And this one, I get why they do music in Rumbles now. I liked it when they didn't have music in those old Rumble matches. They didn't have music until about 96. But you could hear the pop for those guys, because they're waiting, the countdown, who's coming through the curtain. No music though. The guy comes out, like, yeah, loved it. And when Macho came out, the place went crazy, and we're all looking at each other like, yeah, it's over now. And even though Macho didn't last too long in that matchup, though, we still knew Macho was going to be the one to break up the whole thing. And then when the Rumble participant didn't come out later in the match, and Vince brilliantly on commentary says, "Oh, that must have been Bret Hart." And we actually believed it too. Like, oh yeah, crap, okay. Because at this point, we're thinking, well, it's going to be Bret and Owen at WrestleMania, which it was. But still, we didn't know what the full extent of the story was going to be. Far from it. And when Bret hobbled out, we were all like, ah, like, you know, we're all like, yeah, oh my God. My cousins and I are freaking out. Like, and he's hobbling to the ring, but oh, there's no way he's going to win this. No way. Like, you know, and the whole him and Luger at the same time. I thought it was pretty. I like that. I can see why they never revisited it at the same time. The rumors are Vince wasn't really big on it after it was all said and done, and that's why he's never did it again, even though it was unintentionally done with Cena and Batista, and Vince tore both his quads. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. But yeah, that Rumble was really well done. Told some great stories. And 94, you know, it set the tone for, you know, 94 wasn't the best year of wrestling, obviously, for many reasons, but it had its moments, and I think that Rumble was the reason why for much of it. And, you know, I think one of the Rumble that I love that's always been a sentimental favorite of mine is 97. Now, to me, 1997 was one of the best years in wrestling in general. And really, so the WWF still had something in the tank, even though WCW was still beating them heavily across the board, especially with ratings. But that whole thing, now you could tell, I know sometimes they say lack of star power can hurt a Rumble. Yeah, it does, but it doesn't. As long as you're telling a good story with the big stars, I don't think he's going to have some dead spots. Rumble's not always going to be perfect. But I remember that Rumble, particularly, they had, you know, guys from AAA coming in. They brought in Terry Funk that weekend, who had that very memorable appearance on Shotgun Saturday Night. Oh, God. But yeah, and that's the thing. There's a lot of fodder in the match. You know, and again, they needed it though for the Steve Austin spots because he eliminated a lot of people that night. And it was well put together, I thought, for the most part. And the finish was really, again, it set the tone for a great year in wrestling. That whole Rumble began kind of, you know, planted the seeds for Bret's heel turn, and just the way it was, again, all done. You had to love it. And the atmosphere of the Alamo Dome, because that's where the Rumble was this past year, just this past weekend. And I love the way they put that together. And the whole thing of Austin being thrown over the top rope and the refs not seeing it. And I would actually, with the Rumble, the only Rumble that I ever booked locally, use that because I thought it was great and could tell a great story too. And yeah, you know, and I think the only Rumble I didn't like or didn't enjoy even remotely was 99. Even though 98 was probably the most predictable Rumble of all time, with, you know, we all knew Austin was going on to WrestleMania to fight Shawn. I still at least found some certain things about it very intriguing, like the Mick Foley deal with all three gimmicks. But like stuff like that, like, I mean, that's the part of the magic of the Rumble. But the 99 Rumble to me is just so overbooked and contrived in so many ways too. It's, and just the way it was spaced out with, you know, even when you have a lack of star power in some Rumbles, you need to space it out in certain ways. I know the Attitude Era had a lot of stars, but for whatever reason, certain parts of this Rumble seemed like the best of Shotgun Saturday Night. You know what I mean? And yeah, I don't know, but you know, the whole Austin being ambushed by the corporation, you know, the whole driving back in the ambulance, like the old Mabel being sacrificed with the Undertaker. Oh, it's just Kane getting up in a straitjacket. I get a headache just thinking about it. And I don't hate Vince Russo. As a matter of fact, I think even a couple months before that, he had one of his best moments in the history of his tenure in professional wrestling with the 98 Deadly Game Tournament Survivor Series. Fantastic stuff. And yeah, like it was just I'm at the peak of my wrestling fandom here. I'm almost 16 years old. I'm a teenager. It's the Attitude Era. And, you know, things are red hot, but I remember myself, as my good friend John Forjak and my cousin Mike were all watching together, and just like, what is happening here? And it started out so well, because the build up to Austin finally getting his hands on Vince in an actual match atmosphere, because they were number 1 and 2 in the Rumble that year, was so good. And the moment Austin struck Vince, the crowd went nuts. Like, oh my goodness. And the way, again, like I said, it started out so well, and then it just ended so like, even at the end when Vince at least I understood the logic of Vince winning, obviously, but all three of us at the time, and again, I'm by no means, you know, a smart mark at this point or whatever, when he's trying to reach for the Rock, like, Vince is gonna push you out. We're all saying that because Mike's 10 years old at the time. He's saying, "No, what is he doing? What is he doing?" So yeah, Russo-ist, Russo-ist. That's the only Rumble I didn't really truly like. Yeah, and when you talk about Rumble surprises, yeah, there's been some really good ones. To me, one of the most shocking for me personally was in the 2001 Rumble where Haku. Because, okay, I wasn't watching a lot of WCW at the time. I really wasn't. I wasn't watching a lot of WCW, but at the same time I knew Meng was there. I knew a week before the Rumble he just won the hardcore title at WCW pay-per-view. And when he came out, it's Meng. And I wasn't watching it with anybody. I was one of the pay-per-views I watched by myself. I'm like, the hell? And he was just WCW like a week ago. And I was legit shocked. Like, wow. I remember seeing John at school the next day. And I said to him, like, dude, Meng was in the, or Haku, Meng, or whatever you want to call him, he's in the Rumble. He's like, what? I just saw him on Nitro. That's what I mean. Like, it was so shocking, right? And I like stuff. I like little, again, it's part of what makes the Rumble great. Again, little surprises. You know, Nash returning, years later. It's just some great stuff. The 2002 Rumble is one of the best in my opinion as well. Again, everyone remembers Maven and The Undertaker, the build-up of Triple H's return, the star power in that Rumble. The return of Mr. Perfect to me was a huge mark-out moment for me personally. The way that Rumble was put together, the way it was, the way the crowd was electric, and even though the Attitude Era at that point was over, but that was I don't know, there's just something spectacular about that 2002 Rumble. And there's maybe only like a couple of dead spots here and there, but again, I remember for the most part it was clicking. And that final segment, again, Austin Angle, Triple H, Mr. Perfect, just, again, some great stuff. And, that's what I mean. In so many Rumbles, again, you think of the finishing sequences too. I mentioned Brett and Luger, you know what I mean? Spilling over the top rope. To me, one of the best Rumble finishing sequences ever was 2007 with Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. They had a nice little mini match. And it pretty much was the beginning of the build-up for 2 years to the WrestleMania match. Because I remember they had a beginning of the Rumble, the last two that year, first two next year. And then 2009, they're finally facing WrestleMania. Again, that's what I really love about this stuff. Even the finishing sequence I thought with Gunther and Cody this year was really well done. I thought they had good chemistry. And I liked it. I liked it a lot, actually. And it really put Cody over well, but Gunther had a great performance. That's what I mean. You can get put over in many ways in the Rumble, and Gunther really stole the show. But it was a great moment for Cody, too, so there you have it. Both men look great. And, I think of stuff, too, like the CM Punk and Straight Edge Society trying to convert people during the 2010 Rumble. Or even before that, in 2009, Randy Orton with a good story with Legacy, just pretty much watching his back the whole time. Great heel stuff. Remember, that was he punted Vince in the head that week. Like, they built up Orton so well, and then they screwed it up completely by WrestleMania. I know obviously Orton did okay for himself, clearly, but you know what I mean. But that's the thing, just the magic of stuff that would happen. Again, I think, 2014, that was CM Punk's last match for nearly a decade. And it's weird to think about. I like the AJ Styles debut at the Rumble made me leap out of my seat. Yeah, I've always been a huge fan of his. I always wanted to see him in WWE, and I got my wish. And he's had a good run. And a lot of people didn't think either would happen, that he'd be in the Rumble or he'd be in WWE here. Have a good run, even, And just the way it was well put together was, and I like the women. The women's Rumbles have been pretty good more often than not. I love Rhea Ripley. Glad she won this year. But that is why those memories help shape my fandom. You know what I mean? The memories of these moments in Royal Rumble history. It's fun to look back on. They're always good. When you're bored and you want to watch something good with wrestling, you always go back to the Rumble. It's always something to go back to. Even my cousins and some of my friends who don't watch wrestling anymore, really. They've seen the odd Rumble since they were fan of stuff. Even though they might only know like one or two guys in it. I gotta think of Edge's return in 2020, just before COVID. Being a huge Edge fan, I wanted to cry tears of joy. I'm not afraid to say. That was a huge mark-out moment for me as well. His big return. So, I think the Royal Rumble will always look back upon fondly. And, you know, so much so that, I'll tell this story quickly before we wrap up. The Rumble, I had the chance to book a Rumble. It's hard. It's hard. My biggest criticism of myself with it is that it went on longer than it should have probably. But we didn't lose the crowd. And it's still, I thought it was, again, a great finish. I was happy with how it turned out. Now, the two promoters who are still running that company to this day, we would get together every other week or so and discuss, booking ideas, plans, because even though they hired me to book, obviously being the guys who own the thing, they have final say. But they trusted me with a lot at the time. And we figured, okay, we want to do 30. And we, had to plan out the budget to make sure it's feasible. And that was, more to them, and I helped them plan that out as well. It was, we all put it together, and I remember, we could pull this off. You know what I mean? And lo and behold, for the most part, it worked. Planning it was, again, we found the right guys. And again, that's the thing with Rumbles, you got to find the right sequences, the right people, the right places. It's not, I remember, I never worked hard. I've worked less on shows I booked than this one match. You know what I mean? And because the singles matches or the non-Rumble matches we had that day were pretty well put together, easy peasy. But just made sure everything was well put together, and I had their input. I had actually got the advice of the people in the Rumble, change certain things around. Again, that's the beauty of the indie scene; they can really help you out. And the way I planned it out was that I kind of made sure I had the right arc and get to the story I want to tell. Who I want the Iron Man or woman to be. We had women in this Rumble, and who I wanted, what stories I wanted to progress. Because again, it was the same thing. We wanted to tell stories for the rest of the year, and it was still early in the year. Now we call it the Hamilton Heritage Rumble because, again, we're celebrating the history of Hamilton wrestling that day. Of course, the first Rumble, it's a throwback to the first Rumble being held in Hamilton, and we all had the idea, and we were that close to doing it and pulling it off. We were going to contact Hacksaw Jim Duggan and his people on that. Because, as we thought, why don't we bring in Hacksaw? Hacksaw was still taking indie bookings around this time. Why don't we bring him in? And they leaped at the idea. They loved it. And they wanted it. But sadly, the only reason it didn't happen, though, was because Hacksaw's health problems were acting up at the time. And so obviously we couldn't make it happen. But that would have been great. It would have been so good. Because it would have made perfect sense. They had the idea they wanted it to be a surprise, kind of no. I said, unless it's a guaranteed sellout, we don't do that. And it wasn't a guaranteed sellout at that point. Let's hype him up. We could put some more asses in seats with him being there. Because Hacksaw is, again, well-loved, still one of the most beloved wrestlers on the scene to this day. He's still over Rover no matter where he goes. And after all these years. And I would have loved to have him there, but we made a lot of good stuff happen. We had some comedy spots. We had, again, we built up our feuds going again, and again, continued feuds that were going on at the time. So it was difficult, but I enjoyed doing it at the same time. And we did finish similar to '97 with Steve Austin getting thrown over the top rope, referee's not seeing it, come back in and eliminating Brett, but we actually turned somebody heel, a wrestler by the name of Eazy-E, Eric Kearney, one of my personal favorites. He was a babyface at the time, and started a feud. Now because our first Hamilton Heritage Rumble was for the Hamilton Heritage title to crown the first champion, and what I wanted to do was make Eric the Hamilton-born heel who turns on the city. Now people make jokes and jabs at Hamilton, and some of them are well warranted, granted. But that's the thing. It's even people who know that Hamilton can be a trash city, sometimes yeah, you're trashing my city. You know what I mean? And it worked. It worked. We had him Cut a promo afterwards, trashing the city, and it led to a year story with him and Rip Impact, who of course played the Hamilton hero, because again, legit Hamilton-born boy, fighting for the honor of the city and the heritage and the history of the city. It was just some great stuff, and again, it began something great, and I really was proud of how that all came together, and the fact that I got to book my favorite gimmick match, the fact that I just worked, the fact that I got to do it was an honor, and I'll always be thankful for Josh and Justin for giving me that chance to do that. You know what I mean? To me, that was one of my favorite moments ever in being involved in the local wrestling scene these past 10 years, and something I'll always remember. And like I said, it had its flaws, had its fair share of flaws, but I still look back upon that and smile. You know what I mean? And it was a learning experience too. Because actually, I'll even say this: what I did was I messaged each individual wrestler in the Rumble weeks before the show, told them when they were coming in, at what point, like say, okay, so after a number of this and that comes in, this is where you build to your elimination type deal. Make sure you get stuff in with this guy, that guy, because you're going to be feuding with him, like stuff like that. I would make sure I had every detail covered. It wasn't easy, but somehow it worked. And I was paranoid even during the match. During the match, I'm paranoid, thinking that something's going to get messed up. I didn't do this right, I didn't do that right, maybe I screwed this up. And to the credit to all 30 of the wrestlers in that match, I tip my hat out to them to this day, because they pulled it off. And it wasn't that I didn't trust them, obviously. I'm thinking maybe I screwed up. And maybe the lines, I maybe broke the line of communication here and there. There's a little kink that I didn't untangle. But I was amazed, even doing it on the independent level. I'm thinking, how did Pat Patterson, Vince McMahon, and whoever's put Rumbles together pull this off on that level? You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. Well, it was the only Rumble match I ever booked, but I was proud of how it turned out. And, again, it all stems from my fandom of my favorite gimmick match of all time.